"Sir, you're disrupting a public event. I told you to clear the area," Officer Torres yelled, her voice sharp with authority just before the electric crackle and hiss of the taser. Robert Bobby Chen, 76, blind and disoriented, cried out as the barbs struck, collapsing onto the brick pavement of Heritage Plaza, his white cane spinning away from his grasp. Festival goers screamed. Cell phones started recording. A war hero was convulsing on the ground while his military service dog howled in anguish. What the officers didn't see, what they couldn't have known, was the Bronze Star medallion that tumbled from Bobby's shirt as he fell, glinting against the blood-warm brick. That small piece of metal was about to change everything. If you believe those who've sacrificed sight for service deserve our utmost protection, not pain, type honor below. Your voice matters more than you think. Robert Chen had lost his sight in 1969, not in a blaze of heroic combat, but from a concealed, improvised explosive device during a routine patrol near Da Nang. The shrapnel had permanently destroyed his optic nerves, but not his spirit. At 76, he maintained the bearing of the 82nd Airborne paratrooper he'd once been. Straight posture, precise movements, and an unshakable dignity forged in the crucible of war and hardship. Duke, his German Shepherd companion, was no ordinary service dog. The 8-year-old canine was himself a retired military working dog who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan before being matched with Bobby through a special veteran-to-veteran program. Duke understood commands in both English and tactical hand signals, his training evident in the alert, protective way he guided Bobby through the world. Today's mission was simple but meaningful. Bobby's weekly visit to the Veterans Memorial Plaza during the city's Heritage Festival. Every Saturday, he would make the 10-block journey from his modest apartment to lay a small American flag at the memorial and spend a few quiet moments honoring fallen comrades. The festival created chaos, but Bobby knew the route by heart. Duke ensured they navigated safely through the increased foot traffic. Heritage Plaza buzzed with activity. Food vendors lined the perimeter, children ran between booths selling crafts and memorabilia, and a local band performed patriotic songs on a temporary stage. The brick pathways were crowded but wide enough for Bobby and Duke to move through without difficulty. Officers Amanda Torres and Jake Wilson, both recent academy graduates with less than 8 months on the force, were assigned crowd control for the festival. They'd been stationed near the memorial section of the plaza, tasked with preventing loitering and maintaining clear pedestrian flow. Both officers were young, eager to prove themselves, and perhaps overzealous in their interpretation of maintaining order. Torres spotted Bobby and Duke moving slowly but steadily toward the memorial area. She saw an elderly man in civilian clothes with what appeared to be a large dog moving against the general flow of festival traffic. From her position 30 yards away, she couldn't clearly see the white cane or Duke's service vest. "Look at this guy," Torres said to Wilson, gesturing toward Bobby. "Probably another homeless veteran looking for handouts. They always hang around these events." Wilson squinted in Bobby's direction. "Yeah, and he's got that mangy dog with him. Bet it's not even a real service animal, just another scammer." Neither officer considered approaching to simply inquire about Bobby's intentions. They didn't notice his military bearing, the deliberate way he moved, or the fact that Duke wore the distinctive vest of a working service animal. They saw what they expected to see, a problem to be eliminated quickly and efficiently. The afternoon heat pressed down on the plaza, and the crowds moved in waves around the various attractions, creating a constant hum of voices and activity that would have been overwhelming to someone relying on sound for navigation. "Excuse me, sir," Torres called out, striding purposefully toward Bobby, her hand already resting on her radio. "You cannot bring that animal into the memorial area during the festival." Bobby, focusing intently on Duke's guidance and the tactile feedback from his white cane, didn't hear the shout over the ambient noise of the crowd. Duke, however, sensed the approaching authority figure and slowed slightly, his ears perked in alert awareness. "Sir, I'm talking to you." Torres raised her voice, now drawing attention from nearby festival goers. Wilson flanked to the left, positioning himself to cut off any potential escape route, though Bobby was moving at a steady, unthreatening pace toward the memorial. An elderly woman at a nearby craft booth looked up from her purchases, noticing the scene developing. "Officer, I think that man might be—" she began, but Torres cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Ma'am, please step back. We're handling this." Bobby finally sensed the commotion around him as Duke stopped completely, the dog's training kicking in to assess the potential threat. Bobby tapped his cane gently, trying to understand why they'd halted. The cacophony of the festival made it impossible for him to pinpoint specific voices or determine what was happening. "That's it," Torres announced to Wilson. "Deaf and dumb, probably drunk too. These old guys are all the same." She keyed her radio. "Central, we have a vagrant refusing to comply with crowd control directives at Heritage Plaza. Subject appears intoxicated and non-responsive. Requesting backup for arrest." Bobby, feeling Duke's tension through the harness, attempted to continue toward the memorial. He'd made this journey dozens of times. He knew exactly where he was and where he needed to go. The Bronze Star medallion around his neck caught on his shirt collar, pulling free to rest visibly on his chest, but the officers were too focused on his non-compliance to notice. "Sir, final warning," Torres shouted, her hand moving to her taser. "Stop resisting and remove yourself and that animal from this area immediately." Festival goers began pulling out cell phones, sensing something was about to go very wrong. A teenage boy started live streaming, his phone capturing Bobby's confused face as he tried to understand the source of the shouting. Wilson moved closer, interpreting Bobby's continued movement as defiance. "He's not responding, Amanda. Looks like he's going to make us do this the hard way." The summer heat had intensified, creating a shimmering haze above the brick plaza. The smell of grilled onions mixed with the scent of Duke's anxiety-driven panting. Children at nearby booths stopped playing to stare at the unfolding confrontation. Bobby, finally understanding that someone was shouting at him, turned his head in the general direction of the voices, his sightless eyes searching for comprehension. His mouth opened to speak, to explain, but Torres had already made her decision. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" she announced, drawing her weapon and aiming at the confused, defenseless veteran standing motionless in the middle of Heritage Plaza. In the split second before Torres fired, Bobby did something that would later be captured by 17 different cell phone cameras from various angles, though none of the officers witnessed its significance. He slowly, deliberately, brought his right hand up to his chest and placed it over his heart. Not in a gesture of surrender, but in the instinctive military response of a soldier acknowledging his flag. The Bronze Star medallion pressed against his palm, warm from the afternoon sun and worn smooth by decades of quiet pride. Duke, sensing his partner's shift in posture, moved slightly to Bobby's side and sat at perfect attention, just as he'd been trained to do during military ceremonies. The dog's posture was ramrod straight, his ears forward, eyes alert, a soldier standing with his fellow soldier. "Wait!" a voice called from the crowd. "That's a Purple Heart on his—" The electric barbs struck Bobby in the back and shoulder. 50,000 volts coursed through his frail 76-year-old frame, sending him into immediate neuromuscular incapacitation. His hand never left his heart as he collapsed. The medallion clutched tightly in his fingers even as his body convulsed on the hot brick pavement. "Oh my God, he's a veteran!" screamed the woman who had tried to warn Torres. "That's a Bronze Star! You just tased a war hero!" Duke didn't flee or attack. Military training overrode every canine instinct. The German Shepherd remained at Bobby's side, positioned protectively between his fallen partner and the approaching officers, making no aggressive moves but releasing a haunting whine that cut through the festival noise, a sound of pure anguish that somehow conveyed more dignity than all the shouting and chaos around him. A retired Marine in the crowd pushed forward, his face contorted with rage. "Are you out of your minds? That man served this country." Torres approached with handcuffs, shouting, "Stop resisting," even though Bobby was clearly incapacitated. Wilson secured the scene, but the crowd was no longer silent. They were angry, recording, and demanding answers. Bobby's lips moved silently, not in protest or pain, but reciting something sacred. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. The Bronze Star medallion glinted beneath his trembling hand as sirens began to wail in the distance. 8 minutes. That's exactly how long it took from the moment Bobby Chen hit the brick pavement of Heritage Plaza to the moment the festival's cheerful atmosphere was shattered by a sound none of the civilians had ever heard before. The synchronized roar of military vehicles moving in formation. The first to arrive wasn't an ambulance or police supervisor, but a convoy of olive-drab military vehicles that seemed to materialize from thin air. A Humvee led the procession, followed by 2 light-medium tactical vehicles and a communications truck, all bearing the insignia of the nearby Westfield Air Force Base. From the lead vehicle emerged Colonel Maria Rodriguez, a woman whose very presence commanded immediate attention. At 45, she was the youngest base commander in the region, with silver eagles on her collar and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of 2 decades of exemplary military service. She'd been reviewing personnel files in her office when the call came through the military's emergency veteran network, a system few civilians knew existed, but one that could mobilize resources with frightening efficiency. Colonel Rodriguez's aide, Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, quickly established a secure perimeter while the colonel strode directly toward the cluster of police officers surrounding Bobby, who was now being attended to by paramedics. Duke remained at his partner's side, alert but calm, somehow understanding that help had arrived. "Officers," Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the commotion like a blade. "I am Colonel Maria Rodriguez, commanding officer of Westfield Air Force Base. What is the status of Sergeant Chen?" Torres, who had been attempting to explain the situation to a newly arrived police supervisor, turned to face the colonel with obvious confusion. "Ma'am, this individual was disrupting the festival and refusing to comply with lawful orders. We had to use necessary force to—" "Sergeant Chen!" the colonel repeated, her voice deadly quiet as she looked down at Bobby, who was conscious but clearly shaken. 82nd Airborne, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart recipient, and volunteer coordinator for our base's Wounded Warrior program. The weight of that revelation fell over the plaza like a heavy blanket. Wilson's face went pale. Torres stammered, We didn't know. He wasn't responding to commands." Colonel Rodriguez knelt beside Bobby, who was struggling to sit up despite the paramedics' protestations. "Bobby, it's Colonel Rodriguez. Can you hear me clearly?" Bobby's face, streaked with tears he didn't realize he'd shed, turned toward her voice. "Colonel, Maria, what happened? I was just trying to get to the memorial." "I know, Bobby. Duke did his job perfectly. You did nothing wrong." She stood and faced the officers, her expression hard as granite. "Officers Torres and Wilson, you have just used a potentially lethal weapon against a disabled veteran whose only crime was attempting to honor his fallen comrades at a public memorial." The colonel gestured to Master Sergeant Walsh, who stepped forward with a tablet. "Sergeant Chen lost his sight serving this country in Vietnam. He has been visiting this memorial every Saturday for 12 years. Duke is a retired military working dog with more combat deployments than both of you have years of life experience." Torres tried to interrupt. "Colonel, we were doing our job." "Your job," Colonel Rodriguez's voice rose for the first time, silencing not just the officers but much of the surrounding crowd, "was to serve and protect. Instead, you attacked a man whose service record includes saving the lives of 6 soldiers under enemy fire, a man who has volunteered over 3,000 hours helping wounded veterans transition to civilian life." She turned to address the gathering crowd of festival-goers, many of whom were still recording. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today was not law enforcement. It was the assault of a decorated war hero whose only intention was to honor the memory of his fallen brothers and sisters." The colonel's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried further than any shout. "Some truths don't need a microphone. They speak in the silence of sacrifice. The transformation of Heritage Plaza was swift and profound. Word of Bobby's identity spread through the festival like wildfire, carried by social media posts, text messages, and the hushed conversations of witnesses who couldn't believe what they'd seen. Colonel Rodriguez personally helped Bobby to his feet, ensuring he was steady before guiding him toward the Veterans Memorial. Duke, sensing the shift in atmosphere, fell into perfect formation beside them. The crowd that had been watching in horror now parted respectfully, creating a clear path to the monument. "Bobby," the colonel said softly as they walked, "would you like to complete your mission?" With hands that still trembled slightly from the electrical shock, Bobby reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small American flag, the same ritual he'd performed every Saturday for 12 years. Duke guided him to the exact spot at the base of the memorial where he always placed his tribute. As Bobby knelt and carefully positioned the flag among the flowers and other mementos left by visitors, something extraordinary happened. The festival music stopped. Conversations faded to whispers, then to complete silence. Even the children seemed to understand that they were witnessing something sacred. Colonel Rodriguez called her troops to attention. The sound of military boots snapping together echoed across the plaza as 8 Air Force personnel rendered a crisp salute to the kneeling veteran. Master Sergeant Walsh produced a bugle from one of the vehicles and began playing taps, the haunting melody carrying across the plaza and beyond, reaching the edges of the festival where vendors and visitors had stopped everything to listen. Bobby's Bronze Star medallion caught the late afternoon sun as he remained kneeling, his head bowed in silent prayer for comrades who would never come home. Duke sat at perfect attention beside him, a living reminder that bonds forged in service transcend species and time. When the last note of taps faded, Bobby slowly stood. The crowd began to applaud, not the casual clapping of entertainment, but the deep, reverent applause reserved for heroes. Veterans in the crowd stepped forward, identifying themselves, creating an honor guard around Bobby as he made his way back through the plaza. Officers Torres and Wilson watched from the periphery, both now in the custody of their supervisor pending investigation. The viral videos were already spreading beyond the city, carrying with them a message that would resonate far beyond Heritage Plaza. Colonel Rodriguez walked beside Bobby as they left the memorial area. "Bobby, I want you to know, this will never happen again. Not here, not anywhere we have influence." Bobby's weathered hand found Duke's harness, and together they moved through the crowd of supporters, their dignity intact despite the day's trauma. The Bronze Star medallion rested proudly on his chest, no longer hidden, catching the golden light of sunset. Behind them, the military vehicles began to withdraw, but their message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. America's veterans are never alone, never forgotten, and never without protection when the call comes. If you typed honor earlier, thank you. If this story moved you, subscribe now so we can share more stories of dignity and justice together. We stand together, even in silence. See you in the next one.